The wind in the Arizona desert carries a kind of silence that feels almost deliberate, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. The horizon burns in muted oranges, the air shimmering above the asphalt. On days like this, the road looks endless, disappearing into a mirage that promises escape but leads nowhere. Drivers who pass through say there's something uncanny about this stretch of land. The way the radio static deepens, the way time feels slower, heavier. They call it the highway to nothing. In the summer of 1977, a family of four vanished somewhere along this road. The Wilcox family, Richard, Linda, and their two children, Emma and Jack, left their small home in Mesa one Friday morning for a simple road trip to Phoenix. They never arrived. By Monday, a neighbor reported them missing. By Wednesday, the sheriff's department found their car abandoned by the side of an unpaved service road, miles from any town. The discovery was brief, the search half-hearted in the desert, as it always does, swallowed the rest. At first, the story barely made it past the county line. Just another family lost in the heat, people said. Arizona in July has a way of erasing the unprepared. But there was something off about this case. Details that refused to sit still. The car doors were unlocked, the keys left in the ignition, a picnic basket in the back seat, as if the family had stopped for lunch and simply walked off. There were no footprints leading away from the car, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of another vehicle. Only dust, smooth, untouched, and ancient. The first deputy on the scene would later recall how strange the air felt that morning. He said it was quiet, but not the usual desert quiet. It was heavier, almost like the silence before a storm. He remembered stepping out of his cruiser and hearing nothing at all, not even the chirp of insects. When he opened the car door, the handle was hot enough to burn. Inside, the air was stale and still. The family's belongings were there. A cooler, a blanket, a folded road map marked in blue pen with a small circle around a place called Sundown Mine. That name didn't mean much to anyone back then. Old mines are scattered across Arizona, like bones, relics of dreams that ran dry. But in the sheriff's report, there's a single note written in the margin, half faded from age. Possible connection, locked chest found nearby. Contained. No one ever explained what that meant. The report ends there. In the years since, the desert reclaimed the memory. The Wilcox disappearance became a rumor, a ghost story told around campfires. Some said the family stumbled into an old shaft and never found their way out. Others whispered about cults, secret tunnels, or things best left buried. But all that remained certain was this. For people drove into the desert one July afternoon and never came back. There's a kind of cruelty in the way the landscape hides its truths. From a distance, the red mesas and endless plains look almost holy, a cathedral carved by time. But up close, everything feels fragile. You can lose your sense of direction in minutes. The sun disorients you. The silence plays tricks. Out here, the line between what's real and what's imagined blurs easily. The desert doesn't care about your story. It absorbs it. And yet, every so often, the wind shifts and something long buried resurfaces. A photograph, a tire track, a name whispered by someone who swears they remember. It's like the land keeps testing us, daring us to dig, to disturb what it's chosen to hide. When you stand where that car was found, or what's left of the site now, the ground feels hollow under your boots. The sun burns your eyes until all you can see are outlines, shapes flickering in the heat. The desert looks the same as it did nearly 50 years ago, and maybe that's the most haunting part. Time hasn't changed it. The air still hums with that same strange silence. What happened to the Wilcox family? The question has no satisfying answer. The official investigation was closed within weeks. Theories came and went. But in some corners of Arizona, locals still tell their children not to stray too far from the road, not to chase the glint of metal half buried in sand, not to follow the sound of voices when there shouldn't be any. Because once, in 1977, a family disappeared into the desert, and the only thing left behind was a locked chest no one wanted to open. They were the kind of family people in small towns remember fondly, not because they were remarkable, but because they weren't. The Wilcoxes were the family that waved from their driveway, that mowed the lawn on Sundays, that sent Christmas cards to neighbors they barely knew. Ordinary, predictable, safe. That's what makes their story so unsettling. The vanishing of something so normal feels almost sacred. Richard Wilcox was 39 that summer, a mechanic by trade and a dreamer by nature. He worked at a garage on the edge of Mesa, fixing other people's cars while saving every spare dollar to open his own shop someday. He wasn't an ambitious man in the way people mean it now. He didn't want fame or money. He wanted a life he could recognize every morning. His co-workers said he was patient, soft-spoken, the kind of man who'd stay late to help a stranger stranded after dark. Linda, his wife, was 2 years younger, a substitute teacher with quiet eyes and a laugh that neighbors called contagious. She was a steady presence in the lives of her children, known for her handwritten notes tucked into their lunchboxes. People said she had a calmness that made her seem older than she was, as if she already knew the fragile weight of happiness. She and Richard met in high school, fell in love in that old-fashioned way that seems impossible now. No grand gestures, just two people who never wanted to stop talking to each other. Their daughter Emma was 10, bright, and endlessly curious. She'd begun collecting postcards from every town they visited, little windows into other lives. Her favorite was from Jerome, the ghost town built on a hill. She said she liked the idea of a place still standing after everyone had left. Jack, her younger brother, was 7, mischievous, restless, a boy who could make a game out of anything. He carried around a small wooden dinosaur that his father had carved for him, its edges smooth from his thumb. The Wilcox family lived in a single-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac line with jacaranda trees. They weren't wealthy, but they were content. Summer nights meant lemonade on the porch, the smell of cut grass, and the hum of cicadas filling the space between their conversations. There's an old photograph of them, taken by a neighbor, standing in front of their car. Richard's arm around Linda, Emma squinting in the sunlight, Jack pretending to roar like his dinosaur. They looked like the picture of an American dream that had somehow survived the 1970s intact. In early July, Richard decided they needed a weekend away. He'd been working overtime, and Linda had finished a long term as a substitute teacher. They planned to drive to Phoenix for a visit with her sister, a short trip that would give the kids a change of scenery. Just a 3-hour drive west, nothing complicated. Richard checked the tires, filled the tank, and packed a cooler with sandwiches and soda. Linda folded a blanket for their picnic stop, and Emma packed her postcards. They left that Friday morning, just after sunrise. The neighbor, Mrs. Carson, remembered hearing the engine start, the low, steady hum of the Ford pulling out of the driveway. Linda waved from the passenger seat, her sunglasses already on, her hair tied back with a scarf. Jack pressed his face to the rear window, making silly faces. Mrs. Carson waved back, then turned away. She said she thought about that moment for years afterward. The small, ordinary farewell that turned out to be the last time anyone saw them alive. Along the road to Phoenix, there were gas stations and rest stops, diners with faded neon signs, and stretches of desert so long and empty you could forget what green looked like. People later reported seeing the family's car at a service station near Apache Junction around 10 a.m. The attendant remembered because Emma had bought a postcard. He said they were laughing, easygoing, the kind of family that made you feel better just watching them. They drove off toward the Superstition Mountains, a route that wasn't the fastest, but was said to be the most scenic. The Superstition Range has always carried a strange reputation. The locals talk about lost mines, old curses, and travelers who never came back. But in 1977, that was just part of the landscape. Folklore wrapped around rock and heat. For the Wilcoxes, it was just another road, another chance to take pictures. Linda kept a small Polaroid camera in her lap. She'd promised Emma they'd stop near the Red Cliffs to take a family photo together. They never reached Phoenix. When Linda's sister didn't hear from them by Saturday evening, she called their home, assuming they'd extended the trip. No answer. By Sunday, she was worried. On Monday morning, she drove the route herself, searching the roadside for any sign, a broken-down car, a police checkpoint, anything. She found nothing. By Tuesday, the sheriff's office was involved. The search effort was brief. 3 days, a handful of volunteers, a helicopter flyover that covered 50 miles of desert. When they found the car, everything looked wrong in a quiet way. No shattered glass, no blood, no footprints. It was as if the Wilcoxes had simply stepped out and disappeared into the air. The food in the cooler had gone warm, the soda bottles empty, the map folded neatly on the passenger seat with that small circle drawn in blue ink. That circle, Sundown Mine, was never on their plan route. When the sheriff asked around, no one had heard of it. The name sounded like something out of a ghost story. But the handwriting was clearly Richard's, and the ink was fresh. Friends and neighbors refused to believe they'd just walked off. That's not who they were, one said. They weren't the type to chase trouble. The Wilcoxes didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't have debts. Their life was steady, predictable. That's what made their disappearance so hard to understand. Nothing in their story pointed toward chaos. And yet, chaos had found them anyway. For weeks, the local paper ran their photos. The family smiling in the sun, under headlines that grew smaller with each edition. After a month, the case slipped below the fold. After a year, it vanished from print entirely. Their house stood empty for a while before being sold to a new family who painted over the walls, though some claimed the children's names were still faintly carved into the wood of the closet door. In the decade that followed, the Wilcox family became a whisper. Not a tragedy, just a question without an answer. People move on, even from mysteries. But for those who remember, that photo lingers like a bruise on memory. For faces framed by sunlight, caught in the last moment before the world forgot them. The green Ford station wagon sat half buried in dust, as if the desert had been trying to swallow it for years. It was found 3 miles off the main highway, at the end of a narrow service road that led nowhere, a trail of gravel dissolving into open emptiness. The discovery happened by accident. A rancher named Carl Bowen spotted the reflection of sunlight off the windshield while driving his pickup across a ridge. From a distance, he thought it was scrap metal. When he got closer, he realized it was a car. When he looked inside, he realized it was something worse. He described the scene later in an interview. It didn't look wrecked or anything. Just placed there, like someone had parked it and walked off. But the thing that got me was the quiet. You know how you can hear the wind out there? Not that day. Not a sound. I stood there for a long time before I even touched the door. The sheriff's department arrived just before sunset. The air was thick with heat, the kind that makes sweat feel like glue. The sun hung low, bleeding orange over the horizon, as deputies marked tire tracks and took photographs. Sheriff Donald Reeves, who led the search, was the first to open the driver's side door. The handle was coated in red dust. The hinges creaked like something exhaling. Inside, the air was stale, trapped since the moment the car had stopped. The keys were still in the ignition. The gas gauge showed half a tank. The picnic basket sat on the back seat, the lid closed neatly. 2 empty soda bottles rested in the cup holder, their labels curling at the edges. There was no sign of struggle, no broken glass, no blood, no torn fabric. On the passenger seat lay a folded Arizona road map, a pen, and a grocery receipt dated the day of the disappearance. The receipt listed a loaf of bread, a pack of batteries, and a note scribbled in the corner. Film. The glove compartment held a camera, Linda's Polaroid. The last photo, still clinging to the roller, showed a blurred stretch of desert road. Nothing else. The undeveloped square beneath it was blank, waiting for light that would never come. The most peculiar detail was the map. A single blue circle drawn around a spot marked Sundown Mine. Reeves didn't recognize the name. There were hundreds of old mining claims scattered across that region, most abandoned decades ago, left to crumble back into the dust. But something about that neat, deliberate circle bothered him. It wasn't random. Someone had meant to go there. He sent 2 deputies to scout the area around the mine. They drove out early the next morning and returned before noon, shaken and silent. They'd found the entrance, sealed by a collapsed wooden frame. It looked untouched for years. Nothing around it suggested the Wilcox family had ever been there. No footprints, no tire marks, no litter, just wind and sand. One of the deputies said he thought he'd heard a faint echo when he called out, not his own voice, but something deeper like a sigh from the earth. Reeves told him to write it off as the wind. What the report didn't mention, or perhaps chose not to, was the object found roughly 40 yards from the car, a chest. Iron-banded, weathered, the color of dried blood. It was half buried in sand, the metal hinges eaten by rust. Reeves ordered it photographed and cataloged. The photo, now yellow with time, shows a chest surrounded by footprints of lawmen and onlookers. It was locked heavy, and when they tried to lift it, something inside shifted, a dull, hollow sound. Reeves decided to take it back to the station for safekeeping. In his handwritten notes, the kind that never made it into official records, Reeves wrote a single line, "Chest locked. Contents unknown. Feels wrong to open." No one knows whether he ever did. Some say it was placed in evidence storage and forgotten. Others claim it was quietly returned to the desert, buried again under the same sand it came from. The file never specifies. The investigation surrounding the car stretched over 3 sweltering days. Bloodhounds were brought in but lost the scent within yards of the vehicle. Helicopters scanned the terrain, spotting only rocks, brush, and the skeletal remains of cacti. Every direction looked the same, horizon upon horizon. Nothing to guide you but the sun, one searcher said. If they walked out there, they'd have vanished in hours. That place doesn't forgive. By the 4th day, the effort dwindled. The temperature had reached 109 degrees, and supplies were running low. Sheriff Reeves made a decision to pull his team back. He said to a local reporter, "We've found all we can find." It was a statement that sounded definitive, but even he didn't believe it. He would later admit, years after retirement, that he woke up some nights hearing the creak of that car door in his head, that faint metallic sound echoing in his dreams. The Wilcox car was towed into town and stored in a fenced yard behind the sheriff's office. For a while, people came to see it. It became a kind of local attraction, something to point to, something to talk about. Mothers told their children not to wander too far into the desert, not to go chasing ghost lights or abandoned things. But as weeks turned into months, the story faded. The dust settled back over the car, over the mystery, over the memories of those who had searched. Still, a few fragments lingered. The attendant from the gas station swore that, on the day he saw them, the father had asked about old roads near the mountains, the kind not shown on regular maps. He said Richard seemed distracted, glancing toward the horizon like he was looking for something specific. When the attendant told him most of those paths were closed, Richard had smiled faintly and said, "That's all right. I think I've already found it." That single sentence became the last confirmed words anyone ever heard from him. Over time, the area around the service road earned a nickname among truckers, Wilcox Point. Some claimed strange things happened there. Radios cutting out, headlights flickering, compasses spinning for no reason. The chest, the one mentioned in Reeves's report, became a kind of myth. A few explorers went looking for it over the years, but none ever confirmed finding it. Some say it's still out there, waiting under a thin layer of dust. Others believe it was never real, a story told to fill the silence. But silence in the desert isn't empty. It's patient. It listens. And sometimes, if you stand still long enough, you can almost feel it breathing. The story of the Wilcox family disappearance didn't end when the search parties gave up. It simply fell quiet, the way a song fades out when the record runs out of grooves. People in town stopped mentioning it aloud, not because they'd forgotten, but because speaking it felt like tempting something to return. In the months that followed, Mesa went on with its life. Children went to school, new families moved into the neighborhood, and the Wilcox house, once bright with laughter and the smell of Linda cinnamon bread, turned into just another property for sale. The new owners painted the front door red and covered the walls in fresh white. But neighbors said that on hot summer nights, when the windows were open, they sometimes heard a faint clatter, like someone moving things in the kitchen, or a child's laugh carried by the wind. No one ever investigated. In small towns, superstition is just another way to stay polite about grief. By 1978, the case had faded from headlines. The sheriff's department filed it under unresolved missing persons, boxed it up, and tucked it away in a metal drawer. Sheriff Reeves retired 5 years later. His replacement never reopened the case. There was no reason to. No new leads, no evidence, no witnesses. It became what most mysteries eventually become, a story. But stories have their own way of surviving. They change shape, they lose names, and gain texture. By the 1980s, the Wilcox family wasn't tragedy anymore. They were a legend. Locals began calling them the family in the sand. The tale shifted with each retelling. Sometimes they were lost travelers, sometimes victims of a cult, sometimes explorers who found something they shouldn't have. Teenagers dared each other to drive down the old service road at night and knock twice on the hood of a parked car, whispering, "Wilcox, come home." Most of them swore nothing happened. A few said otherwise. Every town needs a ghost story. It keeps the dark at bay, gives people something to share when the nights grow long. But beneath the myth, something quieter lingered, a kind of collective guilt. Older residents remembered the search, remembered the faces of the missing. Some remembered how quickly everyone had stopped looking. There was one man who never stopped thinking about it. His name was Tom Garrison, a former deputy who'd been on Reeves's team that summer. When he retired in the early 90s, he took with him a small box of mementos, copies of old photos, a handwritten note, and a fragment of paper torn from the sheriff's report. On it, in Reeves's tight cursive, were the words "chest found near site, contents unknown." Tom was the one who'd found it that day, or at least been standing closest when the chest was lifted from the sand. In his later years, he lived alone in a trailer outside Globe, Arizona. He told a local reporter once that he sometimes dreamed about that day. "It's strange," he said. "In the dream, I'm standing by the car and the door's open. But the inside of it, it's not empty anymore. There's someone sitting in the driver's seat. I can't see their face. I just hear them breathing, slow and steady, like they're waiting for me to ask something." When asked if he ever went back to the site, he said no. He didn't need to. Some places, he said, you carry with you whether you want to or not. As years turned into decades, the Wilcox disappearance became part of the local landscape, something you mention to visitors when pointing out landmarks. That's the old road where that family vanished. It became shorthand for the unknowable. The desert has a long memory, but people don't. Still, not everyone let go. In 1994, an amateur historian named Ruth Navarro published a small self-funded book titled Ghosts of the Mesa, True Arizona Mysteries. One chapter, only 6 pages long, was devoted to the Wilcox case. She had managed to obtain copies of the original police photos. One of them, printed faintly in black and white, showed a blurred object in the distance, barely visible behind the car. She circled it in red and labeled it "Possible Chest." Ruth claimed she'd written to the sheriff's department asking about the item, but never received a response. The department denied ever receiving the inquiry. She concluded her chapter with a single, haunting sentence. If you stare long enough into the desert, it eventually stares back. The book sold a few dozen copies locally. Most ended up in second-hand shops or forgotten boxes in attics. But for some, it reignited something. People began visiting the site again, ghost hunters, amateur sleuths, drifters chasing the thrill of the unknown. They left offerings, candles, family photos, pebbles arranged in circles. Someone even left an old toy dinosaur, worn smooth by time. No one claimed it, but those who found it swore it looked like it had been there for decades. By the early 2000s, most of the original witnesses had passed away or moved elsewhere. Only the desert remained the same, vast, unchanging, patient. The service road grew narrower, swallowed by sand and brush. Satellite images show the faint outline of tire tracks that seem to fade, then reappear farther south, leading nowhere. Sometimes, silence itself becomes the evidence. The absence of noise, of answers, of closure. That's what the Wilcox story became. Not a puzzle to solve, but an emptiness to acknowledge. People stopped asking what had happened. They started asking why it stayed with them at all. There's a theory, not scientific, not even rational, that certain tragedies leave an echo, a kind of emotional residue that clings to the land. The Wilcox site feels like that. Travelers describe feeling watched or hearing faint voices when the wind picks up at dusk. Skeptics say it's just the sound of the desert, rocks shifting, air moving through cracks. But those who've been there speak differently. They describe it as a hum, low and almost human, vibrating in the bones. The town of Mesa moved on, but not completely. Every now and then, an old-timer at the diner will bring up the Wilcox family, usually with a shake of the head and a line that ends a conversation. They went where they weren't supposed to. That sentence, too, became part of the legend, a warning as much as an explanation. The Wilcoxes had vanished into silence, and silence had made them eternal. In the winter of 2002, a man named Daniel Hurst came across an old copy of the Arizona Republic at a thrift store in Flagstaff. The paper was yellowed, its pages fragile, the print ghosting through from the other side. Tucked between an article about gas prices and a local fair was a small column titled, "Family Still Missing After Desert Search." The accompanying photo was of the Wilcoxes, smiling, sunlit, unaware of what would come. Something about that image caught him. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the look on the mother's face, serene but distracted, as if she already knew her story wouldn't end the way she hoped. Daniel wasn't a detective. He wasn't even a journalist anymore. In his 20s, he'd worked for a regional magazine covering human interest stories and small-town mysteries. But after his marriage fell apart and his career drifted, he'd spent most of his 40s writing freelance obituaries and helping archive local histories. He'd always been drawn to the edges of forgotten stories, the ones that never made headlines but linger like static in the background of time. Something about the Wilcox disappearance struck him differently. It wasn't the mystery itself. He'd read stranger tales, but the quietness of it, the sense that it happened in plain sight and then been erased, politely, efficiently, as if the desert and the town had made an unspoken agreement never to disturb it again. He tore the clipping out of the paper, folded it neatly, and put it in his jacket pocket. He told himself he'd just look into it for curiosity's sake. Maybe write a short piece for a small-town history blog he maintained. But that night, he dreamed of an empty road stretching forever under a red sky, and a car sitting alone by the shoulder, doors slightly open, as if waiting for someone to return. Over the following weeks, Daniel began collecting what little he could find. He visited the Mesa Public Library, requesting the old microfilm reels from 1977. The librarian, an elderly woman named June, remembered the case vaguely. "The Wilcox family, right?" she said, squinting. "They just disappeared. We used to talk about it. People got tired of talking." She smiled faintly, as if embarrassed by the memory. When Daniel asked if the paper ever published a follow-up, she shook her head. They stopped writing about them after the sheriff retired, said it was a dead end. On the screen, the headlines flickered like ghosts. "Family vanishes without a trace. Search scaled back. Case declared cold." Then nothing. The story simply ended, as if the earth had swallowed both the family and the attention they once received. Daniel's curiosity hardened into something heavier. He found himself driving the route they had taken, tracing the same highway that cut through the desert. The road shimmered under the sun, endless and cruel. He pulled over at rest stops, stared at the horizon, and tried to imagine what the world must have looked like through their windshield that day. The glow of morning on the hood, the static on the radio, the laughter of children in the back seat. He started hearing their names in his mind when he drove alone. In the evenings, his motel room became a kind of shrine. He covered the walls with maps, photocopies of articles, handwritten notes. A Polaroid of the Wilcox car, printed from a scanned archive image, was pinned above the headboard. He studied it like a puzzle. The angle of the wheels, the position of the shadows, the faint outline of the service road disappearing behind it. Every detail felt like a clue, even when it wasn't. He began contacting people who might have remembered something. Old deputies, retired rangers, relatives of the family. Most didn't respond. Some had died. The few who did talk seemed wary, as if they were recalling a dream they'd rather forget. One former officer told him, that case was bad luck. Everyone who poked around too much and it got burned one way or another. When Daniel asked what he meant, the man just said, "Some stories close themselves." But Daniel couldn't close it. He found a name buried in the old records, Sheriff Donald Reeves, and tracked down a mention of him in a 1988 article about retirees in Pima County. Reeves had passed away the year before, but his daughter still lived in Tucson. When Daniel reached her by phone, she told him her father never talked about the Wilcox case, not even a family. He'd wake up some nights, she said, and go sit outside, just staring into the dark. When I asked what he was thinking about, he'd say, "I left something out there." A week later, she mailed Daniel a small padded envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a page from Reeves's personal notebook. It was dated August 2nd, 1977, the day after the Wilcox car was found. The handwriting was faded but legible. Chest recovered. Locked. Not police property. Taken to office for record. No tag number assigned. Decision pending. And beneath that, almost as an afterthought, something off about it. Don't open yet. The chest. The same chest mentioned briefly in the reports. The one no one had followed up on. Daniel had read about it in a single line of a forgotten newspaper blurb, but seeing it written by the sheriff himself gave it weight. The word yet at the end of the note felt like a whisper that had crossed decades just to find him. From that point on, Daniel's curiosity turned to obsession. He started visiting local archives, asking about evidence logs and storage inventories from the 1970s. Most records have been digitized, but there are gaps, boxes marked incomplete, reports with missing pages. He spent hours in dusty basements, surrounded by the smell of paper and time. Late one night, while scrolling through an online database of Arizona mining claims, he found a reference to Sundown Mine. It was registered in 1913 by a company called Gila Silver Prospectors, then abandoned a decade later. The coordinates matched almost exactly with the area where the Wilcox car had been found. The mine had collapsed in 1927 after a cave-in killed 2 men. It was never reopened. That discovery felt like a small jolt of electricity. He printed the coordinates, pinned them to his wall, and stared at the map until dawn. For the first time, he felt close, as if he'd brushed the edge of something buried too long. Daniel wasn't young anymore. His hands shook when he wrote. His eyesight strained in the glare of the desert sun. But he couldn't stop. He told himself he was doing it for truth, for history, maybe even for the Wilcox family. But in truth, it was something more primal. It was a need to finish what had been left unfinished. He began recording his thoughts in a small tape recorder. Observation, theories, dreams. In one recording, his voice is low, almost hypnotic. They didn't just disappear, he says. They found something. And whatever it was, it didn't want to be found. 2 months later, Daniel packed his camera, a flashlight, and a notebook, and drove toward the coordinates of Sundown Mine. Before he left, he mailed a single envelope to a friend with a note that said, "If I don't call in 3 days, look under sundown." No one knew yet that Daniel Hurst was about to step into the same silence that had swallowed the Wilcox family 25 years before. The road to the Superstition Mountains is older than most of the towns it connects. It winds like a scar through the desert, pale, cracked, and restless under the sun. When Daniel Hurst took that road in late April 2003, the sky was a vast, unbroken blue, the kind of color that feels eternal until you realize how empty it is. He'd been driving for hours, the hum of the tires steady and hypnotic, the world around him shrinking into the pulse of his heartbeat and the rattle of the air conditioner. He carried with him only what he thought he might need: a flashlight, a camera, a small tape recorder, 2 bottles of water, and the printout of the old mining coordinates. The road grew narrower, rougher, until finally it dissolved into dirt. He stopped the car, stepped out, and was met by a wall of heat that hit him like a solid thing. The silence was immediate, not just quiet, but absolute, as if sound itself had been stripped from the world. He began walking. The sun pressed down hard. With each step, dust clung to his boots like fine ash. The landscape was almost lunar, vast stretches of rock and brush, the occasional skeletal saguaro, and the slow hum of wind moving through canyons. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay Sundown Mine. He followed the coordinates, his GPS flickering on and off, the signal weak in emptiness. After nearly 2 hours, he saw it. A jagged cut in the side of a hill, framed by crumbling wooden beams and rusted tools half buried in sand. Sundown Mine. What was left of it? The entrance had partially collapsed long ago, sealed off by time and gravity. The air around it was cooler, stiller. Daniel crouched near the mouth of the mine, brushing away loose gravel. There was a faint smell, metallic, earthy, and old. He turned on his flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The beam reached only a few feet before fading into black. He recorded his voice softly into the tape recorder. "Sundown Mine," he said. "April 24th, 2003. The entrance is still intact, though partially sealed. Temperature is lower here. Feels wrong." He hesitated. There's something about the quiet, like the air's listening. He began to clear the debris from the entrance, moving stones by hand, prying loose boards that had splintered decades ago. The work was slow, his breath shallow. Each time a piece of wood gave way, the sound echoed too long, as if the tunnel beyond was breathing in the noise. Finally, after an hour, he managed to widen a small gap, just enough to slip through. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. The walls were slick with moisture. His flashlight caught the glimmer of mineral veins, silver threads running like scars through the stone. The ground crunched under his boots. He followed the narrow tunnel inward, the beam of light trembling with his hands. It smelled like wet iron and old paper. He moved carefully, marking his path with chalk on the walls, just as he'd read miners used to do. The passage curved deeper, descending slightly. Here and there, he saw remnants of the past, a discarded helmet, a pickaxe handle, the rusted outline of an old lantern. And then something smaller, a torn piece of fabric, caught on a nail, faded almost white. He lifted it. The texture was strange, stiff with age. A child's clothing, maybe. He folded it gently, slid it into his pack. As he walked farther, he began to notice strange shapes on the walls, markings carved into the rock. At first, he thought they were old mine symbols, arrows, numbers, initials. But the deeper he went, the less they looked like language and more like something organic. Circular patterns, almost floral, repeating in uneven rhythms, as if carved by someone trying to copy something they didn't understand. He stopped several times to record his thoughts. "Markings on the east wall," he said quietly. "Not letters. Could be symbols. Could be nothing. Feels deliberate, though." His voice was steady, but there was an edge beneath it, a tremor that wasn't just exhaustion. The tunnel widened into a chamber about the size of a small room. Here, the air was colder still. In the beam of his flashlight, the walls glittered with a thin film of damp crystals. In the center of the floor lay a small pile of debris, stones, dust, and what looked like the remains of a wooden crate. He knelt down and brushed it aside, his hand trembling as he uncovered what lay beneath. It was a chest. It looked impossibly old. Its wood warped and blackened with age, its metal bindings rusted but intact. The lock was still in place, though corroded. He touched it gently. It was colder than the air around it. He could see faint etchings on the surface, worn down but still there, shapes that echoed the carvings on the walls. Daniel sat there for a long time, his breath fogging in the beam of his light. He whispered into his recorder, "Found it. There's no doubt now. This has to be the one." His voice cracked slightly. "It's real." He tried to lift the chest, but it was heavier than it looked. When he finally managed to tilt it, he heard something shift inside, a muted sound, soft but deliberate, like something rolling. He froze. The air around him felt different suddenly, denser. The walls seemed to draw closer. He stepped back, heart pounding. His flashlight flickered once, twice. When it steadied, he thought, for just a second, he saw a faint shadow on the wall opposite him, a shape that wasn't his own. He spun around. Nothing. Just the emptiness breathing back at him. He stood there, frozen, the silence so complete it roared in his ears. The rational part of his mind tried to speak. Old tunnels collapse, air pressure shifts, your mind fills in the blanks. But beneath that voice was another, quieter one, the kind that whispers things you don't want to understand. He backed out of the chamber, step by slow step, never turning his back on the chest. When he reached the narrow tunnel again, he took one last photo with his camera, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the object in the center of that stone room, then slipped through the gap and into daylight. Outside, the world felt foreign. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer, the heat softer but still oppressive. He sat on the ground for several minutes, catching his breath. The desert stretched out before him, vast and indifferent. He looked back at the mouth of the mine, a black wound in the earth, and knew he couldn't leave it there. Before sunset, he returned to his car and retrieved the crowbar. The decision came quietly like an instinct. He couldn't explain it, only that it felt necessary. He re-entered the mine, dragging the crowbar behind him, the metal scraping softly against the stone. By nightfall, he had pried the chest loose from where it had rested for decades. The lock was still sealed, its keyhole filled with rust. Daniel ran his fingers across the top, tracing the grooves of the strange carvings. He whispered into the recorder, almost reverently, "I don't know if I should open this, but I have to know what they found, what they saw before they disappeared." He carried the chest out of mine, the weight of it straining his arms. When he emerged under the moonlight, he stopped, setting it down beside his car. The desert around him was utterly still. The only sound was a low creak of cooling metal and his own heartbeat in his ears. In his final entry that night, recorded inside his motel room, his voice was hoarse. "Found it. It's here with me. Feels wrong to touch, but leaving it behind felt worse. I keep thinking about the Wilcoxes, about how they circled that name on the map. What were they looking for? Or who?" He paused for a long time before ending with, "Tomorrow I'll open it." He didn't know it yet, but nothing he had done in his life, every mile driven, every theory chased, every lonely night staring at old photographs, would compare to what would happen when he turned that lock. The motel walls seemed to breathe around him, expanding and contracting with the hum of the air conditioner. The desert air outside had cooled, but inside the room, the heat lingered, thick and claustrophobic, the kind that sticks to your lungs. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, the chest resting on the carpet beside his boots, a silent thing that felt impossibly heavy for its size. The lamp's light cast long shadows that bent around it, as though the darkness wanted to keep its distance. He had wiped the dust from its surface earlier, tracing the faint carvings with a damp towel. They were strange, intricate, spirals interlocking with shapes that might have once been letters but had lost their meaning over time. The lock was iron, rusted but intact, shaped like an old padlock you'd see in frontier museums. He'd tried to photograph it, but when he developed the images on his small digital screen, something was off. The chest's outline blurred, the light distorted, as if the lens itself refused to hold it. The tape recorder sat beside him on the nightstand, the red light glowing. He clicked record. His voice trembled slightly. "April 25th, 2003. Motel off Route 60, near Apache Junction. The chest is here with me. No markings or identification. I've cleaned the surface. The carvings are unsettling. Not random, not decorative either. They feel purposeful." He paused. "I haven't tried to open it yet. Every time I think about it, I get this pressure in my chest, like it doesn't want to be opened." He let the recorder run as he poured himself a drink from the mini bottle of bourbon he bought earlier. The ice in the cup melted quickly, leaving the liquid thin and warm. He stared at the chest for a long time. His rational mind told him it was just an artifact, something left behind by miners or scavengers, perhaps even part of a stage prop or tourist relic. But somewhere deep beneath that logic, another thought pulsed like a heartbeat. This is what they found. He crouched beside it, running his fingers over the seam where the lid met the base. The wood was rough, splintering in places. He lifted the crowbar he brought from his car and wedged it gently beneath the lock. For a long moment, he just stayed there, frozen, the tip of the crowbar pressed against cold metal, the weight of history hanging in the air. Then, slowly, he pushed down. The lock groaned. A sound like a sigh escaped from the chest, low and hollow. He froze. It could have been air pressure, the wood shifting after decades. But the sound didn't echo, it seemed to breathe. Another push. The lock cracked, rust flaking away like ash. The lid loosened slightly, enough to let out a faint scent, dry earth mold and something metallic like blood or old coins. He hesitated, hands trembling. He whispered to the recorder, "It's open." He lifted the lid. Inside, at first, there was nothing, only darkness and dust. Then his flashlight caught on something faintly reflective. Paper. Dozens of pages, brittle and yellow, tied together with a faded ribbon. Beneath them, a small tin box. And beneath that, something wrapped in cloth, perfectly folded, like an offering. He laid the papers on the bed carefully, untied the ribbon, and began to read. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, written in pencil that had faded almost to nothing. The first few pages were a ledger, filled with numbers and notes. But then the tone shifted. It wasn't a miner's record. It was a journal. The entries were dated June and July of 1913, the first months of operation at Sundown Mine. The author's name appeared once, faintly, E. Larkin. The early entries described ordinary mining activities, the heat, the labor, the men's exhaustion. But as Daniel turned the pages, the words darkened. There's something below the third shaft. The sound comes every night, like whispering under the rock. The men won't go down anymore. Yesterday, Carter said he saw lights in the lower tunnels, like lanterns, but no one was down there. When we went to look, we found the wall had changed, a new opening where there wasn't one before. The stone feels alive. When I touch it, it hums. The last entry read, "We sealed the lower passage. Whatever it was, it wanted to be seen. We buried it with everything it brought." Daniel sat back, staring at the words. The handwriting was frantic, carved into the page with such pressure the pencil had nearly torn through. He whispered, "They buried it with everything it brought." He turned to the tin box next. Inside were small photographs, faded black and white images of men in work clothes, posing near the mine entrance. Their faces were pale, unsmiling. One photo stood out. A group of 6 miners standing before what appeared to be the same chest, its surface newly carved, the lock shining. Behind them, in the shadows of the tunnel, was something else, a faint outline, blurred, human shape, but wrong. Too tall, too narrow. Daniel's breath caught. He leaned closer, but the image seemed to shift as he stared, as though the figure was receding into the dark, even on paper. He put the photo down, his fingers trembling. He unwrapped the final object, the one swaddled in cloth. It was small, about the size of a child's toy. The fabric disintegrated as he pulled it apart, releasing a smell like rust and decay. Inside was a small carved figure, roughly humanoid, made of some dark material. Not wood, not stone. Its surface shimmered faintly under the lamp. Its eyes were tiny hollows, and the mouth was open, a silent scream frozen in whatever it was meant to represent. The air in the room changed. The temperature dropped slightly, or maybe that was his imagination. The shadow seemed to lean toward him. He whispered to the recorder, "It's a figure. I don't know what it is. Looks like a person, but wrong. I think the carvings on the chest match the ones on it." He paused, his voice quieter now. The journal said they sealed something. Maybe this is what they meant. He sat there for a long time, the motel clock ticking in the background. Every so often, he thought he heard faint sounds, like footsteps on gravel outside his door. When he checked, there was no one there. He closed the blinds and locked the door, leaving the chest open on the floor. At around 3 a.m., his final recording began. His voice was slower now, uncertain. "I keep hearing it. A sound, low, rhythmic. It's not the pipes. It's coming from the chest." He paused for several seconds, breathing heavily. "I think it's humming. I tried covering it with a blanket, but it doesn't stop." Another pause. Maybe I shouldn't have opened it. The recording ends there, mid-breath. The next morning, the motel maid found the room empty. The bed was untouched, the curtains drawn. The chest sat in the middle of the floor, its lid closed again. Inside, the papers and photographs were gone. Only the small carved figure remained, lying on its side. No one ever saw Daniel Hurst again. For weeks, police searched the nearby desert. They found his car by the roadside, keys still in ignition, maps spread across the passenger seat. The motel staff described him as polite, quiet, tired-looking. They said he checked in under his own name, stayed 2 nights, and left no forwarding address. But one detail stood out. The night before he disappeared, the clerk on duty remembered hearing something strange, a faint humming coming from room 12, steady and low, like machinery running beneath the floor. When he went to check, The sound stopped the moment he touched the doorknob. By the summer of 2004, the name Daniel Hurst had become another footnote in Arizona's long catalog of vanishings, a strange case whispered about in late-night forums and forgotten corners of the internet. For months, local papers mentioned him briefly. Freelance writer missing near Apache Junction, but the coverage faded quickly. There was no body, no blood, no sign of violence, just a locked motel room and a chest no one wanted to touch. To most, it was another tragedy swallowed by the desert. But to a few, those who remembered the Wilcox case, those who felt a quiet echo in the pattern, Daniel's disappearance wasn't coincidence. It was continuation, a repetition. Among them was a young journalist named Leah Moreno, working for a small Phoenix-based podcast that specialized in unsolved mysteries. Leah had grown up in Mesa, not far from where the Wilcoxes once lived. Her mother still remembered the family's disappearance, the school fundraisers Linda used to organize, the way their porch light had stayed on for weeks after they vanished. When Leah stumbled on a forum post in 2004 that linked Daniel's name to the Wilcox case and the so-called sundown chest, she felt something ignite in her, that same stubborn curiosity that had driven Daniel across the desert a year earlier. At first, she tried to keep her investigation clean, clinical. She pulled records from the sheriff's department, read archived news clippings, listened to Daniel's voice recordings that had been digitized and uploaded by an anonymous user under the name Echo Miner 77. The posts were fragmented, short clips of Daniel describing the mine, the chest, the carvings. His voice was calm at first, then progressively more strained, more uncertain. The final clip ended abruptly after a sound, low and rhythmic, something between a pulse and a whisper. Leah listened to that clip 27 times. She replayed the last 5 seconds again and again, convinced there was something beneath the noise. On the 12th listen, she swore she heard a second voice, faint, almost merging with Daniel's. A whisper so quiet it could have been static, but the cadence was human. A pattern, for syllables, repeated twice. She couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm. That night, she started dreaming about the desert. She'd never been there herself. Not really. Not beyond the edges of Phoenix. But in her dreams, she walked through sand that shimmered like water, following a sound just beyond hearing. When she woke, the rhythm still pulsed faintly in her chest, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Leah decided to retrace Daniel's steps. She drove out to Apache Junction, her recorder and camera on the passenger seat. The road stretched wide and empty ahead, heat rising in ghostly waves. She stayed at the same motel where Daniel had last been seen. Room 12 had long since been cleaned and repainted, but when she unlocked the door, she felt a strange resistance, as if the air inside was heavier than it should have been. The manager, a man named Ray, was hesitant to talk. He'd worked there 20 years and remembered Daniel's stay clearly. "Quiet guy," he said. "Didn't cause trouble. But that last night, I don't know. There was something off about that room after." When Leah asked what he meant, he said, "It smelled like rain, like the kind of air that comes before a storm. But it hadn't rained for weeks." He paused before adding, "The chest's still around, you know. Sheriff's office took it after the investigation, but it's never been cataloged. Someone said it's in storage up in Florence." Leah's pulse quickened. She spent the next few days making calls, posing as a student researcher. Most offices stonewalled her, citing missing paperwork and old archives that hadn't been digitized. But one clerk, an older man who'd worked evidence for 30 years, confirmed that something matching her description had indeed been stored there decades ago. "Big wooden box," he said. "No case number, no tag. Got sent over from Pinal County. Been sitting in the back ever since. Nobody wants to claim it." 2 weeks later, she was standing in that evidence facility. The warehouse was enormous, filled with shelves stacked to the ceiling. Boxes, bags, unclaimed relics of crimes both solved and forgotten. The air smelled of dust and cardboard. The clerk led her down a narrow aisle, his flashlight beam bouncing off old labels. "There," he said, stopping in front of a covered object near the end of the row, a shape under a tarp. "That's the one." Leah hesitated. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I'd remember that thing anywhere." Gives me the creeps. You journalists get your story and then leave, but we're the ones who gotta keep the ghosts. He pulled the tarp away. There it was, the chest, older now, warped by time, but unmistakable. The carving still faintly visible under the dust. The same spiral patterns Daniel had described. The lock replaced years ago with a chain and a heavy clasp. On the lid, in faded marker, someone had written, "Do not open unsafe materials." Leah reached out and brushed away a layer of dust with her fingertips. The texture was strange, rough, almost grainy, like sand fused into the wood. Beneath her touch, she could feel shallow indentations, almost like fingerprints pressed into grain itself. The clerk cleared his throat nervously. "Look, you can take photos if you want, but you can't touch it. Policy. And if you hear anything, just ignore it. Old shifts, you know?" Leah managed a polite laugh, though her throat felt dry. "Hear anything?" He shrugged. "Every now and then, when the air gets real still in here, it kinda hums. But maybe that's just the lights." She took her pictures, wide shots, close-ups, details of the carvings. But when she reviewed them later in her car, she noticed something unsettling. In every frame, the chest looked slightly different. In one, the carving seemed deeper. In another, the lock was at a slightly different angle. And in one photo, the last, a faint shadow fell across the lid, a shape like a hand, though hers had been on the camera the whole time. That night, she couldn't sleep. The motel room air was heavy, the hum of the AC stuttering like a heartbeat. She listened again to Daniel's last recording, the low sound under his voice. This time it wasn't static. She could hear the rhythm clearly now, the same four-syllable pattern from her dreams. The next morning, she uploaded a new episode of her podcast, The Sundown Mind Tapes. It opened with Daniel's final recording, followed by her narration. Calm, deliberate, trying to sound attached, though her voice trembled slightly near the end. She spoke about the Wilcox disappearance, Daniel's journey in the chest and storage. Then she added something new, her own field recording from the warehouse. Just 30 seconds of silence while she stood near the chest. Listeners described hearing something beneath that silence, a faint vibration, almost like breath. Some said they could make out words. One listener claimed to hear a child laughing. Within days, the episode went viral. People began sharing theories online about curses, government cover-ups, and artifacts from lost civilizations. But amid the noise, one comment stood out. It was left on Leah's website under an untraceable username. The lock isn't the only thing that keeps it closed. A week later, Leah vanished. Her car was found outside Florence, near the old mining road. Inside were her notes, her camera, and a copy of Daniel's photograph of the mine. The camera battery was dead, but the memory card contained one final image. The chest, sitting in the middle of a desert clearing, unchained, its lid slightly open. No one knows who took it. The desert holds its secrets the way the ocean holds its dead. Quietly, without resistance. You could drive for miles through that empty landscape, see nothing but rock and air, and still feel that something beneath the sand is watching. By early 2005, the story of the Sundown Chest had spread far beyond Arizona. Online message boards turned it into modern folklore, a digital ghost story that traveled through late-night threads and speculative podcasts. Most dismissed it as an urban legend, a chain of coincidences stretched into myth. But for some, especially those who live near Mesa, Florence, or Apache Junction, it was something heavier, the kind of story that doesn't fade when you close your laptop. And then came the footage. It surfaced one night on an obscure message board called Deserted Truths, uploaded under the title, Hearst's Tape Unedited. The file was low quality, time-stamped April 25th, 2003, the night Daniel recorded his final entries. The user who posted claimed they'd found it on a damaged mini-DV recovered from the Sundown area. No one ever identified them. The video opened with static, thick, analog noise, the kind that hums like breath. Then the image steadied. A motel room. A single lamp glowing near the bed. Daniel's voice filled the frame. April 25th, Sundown Chest, opened. He sounded calm, though his eyes flicked off into the shadowy corner near the window. The camera shook slightly, as if resting in his unsteady hand. He pointed it toward the chest on the floor, its lid open. For several seconds, the shot lingered on the carved figure, the same small, dark effigy he'd unwrapped. The room was silent except for a faint sound in the background, rhythmic, low, like a slow heartbeat. Daniel didn't seem to notice. He whispered, "There's something strange about it. The air feels thick." Then something subtle changed. The camera shifted slightly on its own, the angle lowering, as if the way the device had tilted. Daniel froze. You could see it in his expression, not shock, but confusion, like his body was catching up to what his mind didn't want to understand. The humming grew louder. The chest began to rattle, faintly at first, then with deliberate rhythm. Daniel whispered, "It's moving." The camera cut out. What followed was 15 seconds of black screen, the audio replaced by a sound that no one's been able to explain. A layered whisper, multiple voices murmuring over each other. Some said they heard words like return or below. Others swore it was just wind. But the last 3 seconds, the moment before the tape ends, were unmistakable. Daniel's voice, distant and small, saying, "It's not empty." The video spread quickly, but within 48 hours, the original upload vanished. Every mirror link was corrupted. Audio files warped, frames scrambled. Some who tried to download it claimed their devices froze or crashed mid-transfer. Skeptics dismissed it as deliberate manipulation, an internet stunt. But for those who've been following since Leah's disappearance, it was proof that something had gone far past myth. In the months that followed, more details leaked. Bits of Daniel's research notes, photocopies of his handwriting, fragments of Leah's last episode transcript. Listeners began noticing something eerie in her earlier recordings, long before she'd ever mentioned the chest. Faint echoes, strange clicks between cuts, almost like another track playing underneath. When audio experts analyzed them, they found irregular frequency patterns, not random noise, but structured repetition, a signal. And then something else started happening. Locals near the old Sundown mine began reporting strange sounds at night, low vibrations that came and went with the wind. A rancher described hearing a deep hum like a train underground. Hikers claimed their compasses spun erratically near the collapsed entrance. A group of amateur ghost hunters, inspired by Leah's story, recorded a short documentary near the site. In their footage, one of their cameras caught a faint light flickering behind the rocks, not a reflection, but something pulsing from below. The crew laughed it off at first, but a week later, one of them, a sound engineer named Mark Danner, began posting late-night videos on social media, saying he hadn't been able to sleep since that trip. "It's not tinnitus," he said. "It's in the walls, in the air, like it followed me home." His last video ended abruptly with him standing on his porch, whispering, "It wants to be found." He went missing 3 days later. By now, local authorities refused to comment on anything related to Sundown. The area around the mine was quietly fenced off, no trespassing signs hammered into dry ground. Officially, it was due to unstable geological conditions. Unofficially, even the rangers avoided it. Still, the myth refused to die. Bloggers and self-proclaimed investigators continued the search. One YouTuber named the Urban Excavator claimed to have obtained pieces of the chestwood from an estate sale linked to the Florence Evidence Facility. In a live stream viewed by over 500,000 people, he displayed a splintered plank with the same spiral carvings, and within minutes, his mic picked up a faint low tone. He stopped mid-sentence, blinking in confusion. "You guys hear that?" he asked. "It's like vibrating." The screen flickered, his voice distorted, and the stream ended. His channel went silent afterward. Every disappearance, every corrupted file, every unexplainable sound added another layer to the story, until the Sundown chest became less of a mystery and more of a presence. The forums began referring to it as the thing that wants to be opened. They said once you heard the sound, you couldn't unhear it. It stayed with you, in the hum of your refrigerator, the static of your radio, the low rumble of an engine at night. Some said that's why the Wilcoxes vanished, not because they found something, but because they listened. There was one last piece of the story, though, one final thread that connected the beginning to everything that came after. In late 2005, a retired police archivist from Mesa, the same one who'd helped Leah locate the chest, came forward anonymously to a journalist at the Arizona Tribune. He claimed that years earlier, when Sheriff Reeves first brought the chest in, he'd personally looked inside before it was resealed. He said it wasn't empty. There had been something else buried beneath the papers and the carvings. When asked what he saw, the man paused for a long time before replying, "A photograph. It was of a family, 2 adults, 2 children, standing in front of a car on a desert road. The father was smiling. The mother wasn't. And behind them, in the distance, there was something, a shadow maybe, tall like a man, but it didn't have a face." He said that after that day, the sheriff took the photograph and burned it. A week later, Reeves stopped showing up to work. The journalist who published the story included the archivist's final quote at the bottom of the article. "We always thought the Wilcoxes disappeared in the desert. What if the desert disappeared through them?" It didn't make sense, not in any logical way, but it stayed with people, that phrasing, that idea that the land itself might consume what it touches, not out of hunger or evil, but out of some deep, indifferent need to balance what has been disturbed. Years passed. The stories quieted. The mind collapsed further, sealing itself under layers of rock and heat. But in certain corners of Arizona, the air still hums on windless nights, low and steady, as if something beneath the earth is still breathing, waiting for someone else to listen. Years after Leah's disappearance, her recordings surface online, scattered across obscure forums, mislabeled as experimental art, sometimes mistaken for hoaxes. But to those who listened closely, they carried something else, the same quiet pulse that once filled the Wilcox house. A soft rhythm, for beats, a pause, for beats again, steady, patient, and unexplainable. In one of the recovered tapes, Leah's voice trembles as she describes a recurring dream. She's back in the desert, standing before the locked chest. Around her, the air vibrates, not violently but alive, as if waiting. She says she can hear her brother's voice whispering from beneath the sand. It's not what's inside, it's what it's keeping closed. The final recording ends abruptly. A long silence. Then a single exhale, almost relieved, after Leah vanished. Her apartment was found exactly as she'd left it. Coffee cup on the table, notebook open in the chest, once sealed, now unlocked. Inside was nothing but desert dust. Investigators couldn't trace her last steps. The landlord said he saw her carrying a small bag toward her car. The security camera caught her silhouette turning toward the horizon, the same direction Daniel disappeared in decades before. Beyond that point, there were no footprints, no tire marks, only sand shifting in the wind. A few weeks later, the chest was moved to an evidence locker, but when the clerk logged it, he noted a strange sound. Like a low hum, he wrote. Barely there, but rhythmic, almost breathing. They sealed it again and filed it away. Over the years, the box passed through different hands, archivists, curators, even paranormal researchers, but it never stayed anywhere for long. Each handler reported the same phenomenon. Sleeplessness, headaches, a faint ringing that pulsed in time with their heartbeats. One night, a museum guard on duty near the evidence storage swore he heard a woman's voice. Not loud, but clear. It said only 2 words. It's open. He quit the next day. Rumors grew. Some said Leah had found the original Wilcox property. Others that she'd gone deeper into the mine where Daniel once worked. A few believed she discovered what the family had been hiding all along. Not an object, but a sound buried within the earth itself. A sound that remembers. By 1999, the Wilcox case became legend, its details blurred between myth and memory. But in the quiet corners of the internet, people began to notice something strange. Those who listened to Leah's restored tapes reported hearing a low hum hours after the audio stopped. Not through their speakers, but in their homes, in their walls, inside their own chest cavities. Doctors called it auditory hallucination. Skeptics called it suggestion. But some listeners swore that when they stopped resisting, when they sat still and let the sound flow through them, they felt a calm so complete it frightened them, like the desert had finally recognized them. When Leah found the chest, the desert was utterly still. No wind, no sound, only that unbroken silence that feels alive. The box was small, about the size of an old jewelry case. It was cracked and darkened with time. The lock was rusted, but intact. She brushed away the sand, tracing the carvings with her fingers, spirals, intersecting lines, and the faint outline of a name, E. Wilcox. For a moment, she just stared. After years of searching, of chasing half-truths and ghost stories, she was holding something real. Proof. Her breath came uneven. Excitement and dread tangled together. She turned on her recorder, whispering, "It's here. The chest is here." But then came the sound, that same low hum she'd heard in Daniel's tapes, vibrating faintly through the air. It wasn't mechanical. It felt organic, pulsing like a heartbeat. Leah froze, the desert pressing closer, the world holding its breath with her. She should have left it buried. But she didn't. With trembling hands, she wedged her knife under the lock and forced it open. A sharp click echoed, followed by a rush of cold air, as if something exhaled. Inside wasn't treasure or bones or even photographs, just a thin layer of dust and a folded note. She unfolded it slowly. 5 words. "You were never just listening." Her recorder caught the moment she read it aloud, her voice small, breaking. Then came another sound, faint, rhythmic, matching her heartbeat exactly. That was the last recording Leah ever made. When searchers found her car days later, the chest was gone, the ground around it freshly disturbed. The desert had closed again, smooth, seamless, and silent. Years later, the story of the Wilcox family still hangs over the Arizona desert like a mirage, visible only when you stop trying to see it. The official files are closed, the evidence lost to time, yet people still drive out towards Sundown Mine, hoping for answers the desert never gives. Some bring metal detectors. Others bring cameras. None stay long. They say the ground hums softly beneath their feet, a low vibration, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat buried deep below. One man swore he saw a light moving on the sand, tracing a path toward the old site. Another claimed to hear voices in the static of his radio, a woman whispering, "Listen, maybe it's just wind or memory playing tricks." But those who have been there agree on one thing. The air feels different, heavier, as if the desert remembers what happened and refuses to forget. Whatever was locked away all those years ago never truly slept. It simply waited for someone else to come close enough to hear it again. The desert doesn't close its stories. It buries them. It presses them under layers of sand until only silence remains. But silence has a way of remembering. Even after decades, something still lingers near Apache Junction. When the wind dies and the air turns heavy, the ground itself seems to breathe. People say the Wilcoxes are long gone, that Daniel and Leah and Evelyn were just names swallowed by time. But if you stand there long enough, where the road ends and the dust begins, you can almost feel them, not as ghosts, but as echoes. The same rhythm, the same quiet pull has lived in the desert for nearly 50 years. It isn't evil. It isn't kind. It just is. That's the part everyone forgets, that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only inherited. Like old songs hummed by the wind, like whispers that never stop looking for new listeners. So if you ever find yourself driving through Arizona at night and your radio catches static that pulses in 4s, don't change the station. Listen. Somewhere, out beyond the headlights, the desert is still awake, still calling, not warning, not pleading, just remembering. And beneath that memory, a sound, faint, patient, endless, the hum,